Hi everyone, so in the last video we took another look at loops, and in this video we are going to be taking another look at functions. So the first thing I want to mention is, let's say I want to create an increment function which increments a variable by whatever increment value is given. So the first argument is of course the number we want to increment, and I'll call that n. The second argument is the increment value by which we want to increment the variable, and let's just return n plus inc here, and if I call an increment with 4 and 2, actually let me add a print here. If I do this now, this should give me a 6. So let's just save this and I'll name this functions revisited, and let's just try running it now. If I do that, I get a 6. So that is fine, but what I want to do now is, let's say I don't give this 2, I should by default increment the number given by 1. So I also want to be able to do something like increment 5, and this right now will just give me an error. Let's try running it, and as you can see I've got an error here because this increment function expects 2 arguments and I'm just giving it 1. So this is known as default arguments. What I'm going to do next, I'm just going to add an equal to 1 here. So what I'm saying is the default value of the increment is 1, but in case the user wants to give a larger increment value, a larger or smaller whatever, a different increment value, then he's allowed to do so, and in that case this one equal to 1 will just be ignored and whatever value the user gives will be considered. So let's just run this now, and as you can see this time I got no error and I got a 6 and a 6. That's because 4 and 2 gives me a 6 and 5 and 1 gives me a 6 as well. So this is the first thing that I wanted to mention about default arguments. The second thing I want to mention is, let's say I'm going to I want to take a variable number of arguments. So I don't know how many arguments I'm going to get, so let me just call this variable length, and I want to do something here so that I get a variable number of arguments and I'm able to take those. So the way to do that is just add a star and then write whatever you want to call this, all of these arguments. So let's just call them args. It's typically called something like args, or you could call it argv sometimes, but args is fine. And let's just check here the type of this args. Let's just do a print, and for now let's just keep it that way, and we'll just call variable length with something like hello and Python. So I'm giving it 2 arguments here. You could try giving it 3, it'll still work. So let's just run this now, and as you can see it gave me the type as a tuple. So what that means is that these arguments are received here in the form of a tuple, and that actually makes sense because the 2 ways to take this would be either a tuple or a list. But if you remember, the difference between them is that I cannot add things to a tuple, whereas I can add things to a list, but it doesn't make sense to add things to this args after it has already received these arguments. So if this had been a list, I would have been able to do something like args.append and then give it something here, but I can't do that because args is a tuple. So actually let me just try and let me just show you that this doesn't work, and I'll just add the word world here. Let's save and try running it. As you can see, I've got an error. Basically it says tuple object has no attribute append. So that's the error that I got. So this is actually a tuple, and I can even go through all of these. So I can do a for arg in args. I forgot the colon here. Print arg, and if I do that, let's save and run and see what happens. As you can see, it printed hello and then Python, and I could give it something more as well, something like, let's say, world again, and let's run it now. It gives me hello Python world. So I could give it 3 arguments, I could give it 100, it'll just print them all out. But what I wanted to show you is accepting these variable length arguments in the form of a tuple using this star. So that's the second thing that I wanted to mention. The third and final thing that I want to mention here is, actually let's just leave it like this. I can also add a double star here, and let's just add the characters KW here. What this means is that now I'm going to get a variable number of keyword arguments. So if I say word 1 equals hello, word 2 equals Python, and word 3 equals world. So in this case, let's also actually print the type. So print type of KWARGS, and let's try running it now. And I've got an error which says ARGS is not defined. That's because I didn't add KW here. And let's just run it again. As you can see, it prints out dict for dictionary, and it prints out word 1, word 3, word 2, all of these. So basically I've received all of this as a dictionary, and I can show you the entire dictionary as well. Let's do this, and we should get the entire dictionary. It says word 1 is hello, word 3 is world, and word 2 is Python. So this is the dictionary that I've got, and if I want to print these right here, I can do something like for key in KWARGS, print keyword args of key, and this should give me all of these. So it prints hello, world, and Python. So that's the last thing that I wanted to show you about functions. These are all very important things. Just to summarize what we've learned, the first one was default arguments, where you can give a default value to an argument in case the user doesn't pass any value. The second one is receiving a variable length of arguments, and the third one is receiving a variable length of keyword arguments. Actually, before I end this video, I also want to show you something else. Let's just go back to our let's just go back to our arguments thing, and I'll just write a pass here, which means that I don't want the function to really do anything, and let's just pass any random word here. It's not very important what I pass. What I'm going to do after this is I'm also going to receive an argument called arg1, and let's just save this and try running it. It says there's an error in your program, invalid syntax, and it says that this arg1 is some invalid syntax, And that actually makes sense because it really isn't sure that how many arguments it needs to take into this tuple, and later how many arguments are here. So the only way it allows us to take add this arg1 and also variable length arguments is to add the arg1 here. So if I do this now and if I run, this runs well without any invalid syntax error. So I can add arg1, arg2, arg3, as many as I want, but they all have to be before this tuple that I'm going to receive. And also I can't do something like this where I take two tuples here, and the reason for that, again, I've got an invalid syntax. Again, this is very intuitive because in such a case it doesn't know how many of the arguments to put in arg1 and how many of them to put in the args tuple. So that's the last thing that I wanted to mention. I hope this clears the three concepts that we've talked about. They come in real handy when dealing with some situations. So that's it about functions. I'll see you in the next video.